me guess, this past week, you probably got looped into another conversation about students' behavior. The teacher wanted it fixed, your admin wanted it documented, and somehow all of that landed squarely on your plate. And you want to help, but the last time somebody said, come up with a behavior plan, you weren't given a single data point. The students' needs weren't really even taken into consideration, and the plan became your full-time job. Does that sound familiar? In this episode, we're going to break down what behavior intervention plans are really about, what works, what doesn't work, and how you can support the process without being steamrolled by it. I'm going to walk you through the entire behavior planning process step by step and show you where you fit in as a school counselor, where you don't, and what to do when you're the only one showing up with a plan that actually makes any sense. Let's talk behavior without the burnout. Hey there, welcome back to the School for School Counselors podcast. Yes, it is me. I'm a little raspy and a little hoarse this week, but bound and determined to bring you another podcast episode. I'm Steph Johnson, licensed professional counselor, veteran educator of almost 30 years, and a full-time school counselor just like you. The past few episodes have really centered on bullying, behavior intervention, and ADHD. The who, the what, the when, the where, the why, all the things. Why we shouldn't be the only ones handling these, and how to address them if we're considered the default behavior interventionist on our campus. All the things, right? In this episode, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, and I want to talk about behavior intervention plans. Now, let me say up front, I am not a board-certified behavior analyst. I am not a school psychologist. But I do want to kind of walk you through the general framework as I understand it, so you can get a clearer picture of what's involved. Because I think sometimes we assume that if we just label the behavior or we come up with one thing to try in addressing the behavior, then boom, our job is done and everything should be resolved. But as you probably know already, that's not how behavior change typically works. So based on one of my all-time most popular podcast episodes back in 2023, we're going to revisit the process of developing a behavior plan or an official BIP, which stands for Behavior Intervention Plan. Just as a heads up before we get started, different campuses and different districts might have their own procedures or protocols for this. So don't worry if I describe doesn't exactly match what you've seen in your setting. Our goal here really is to understand the general process and how we fit into it. Okay, so first up, the initial assessment and observation. This is where we try to get a baseline on what's really going on, not just what people think is going on. This step should involve lots of people who are normally in the student's environment throughout their day. That could include classroom teachers, paraprofessionals, even you as the school counselor, depending on the situation. But the goal is to keep things as organic as possible. Because we know if we put a new person in a classroom with a struggling student, sometimes they act completely differently, right? It's like, it's showtime, and they put on their best. And we're sitting in the background saying, no, this is not real life, right? We want a real representative snapshot of their behavior and not a performance. We're going to be looking to document three things: the antecedents, which is what happens before the behavior itself, exactly what happens, and then the consequences of that behavior, what happened exactly after. And as I say consequences, I don't mean punitive consequences in the classroom. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about breaking a rule and getting a penalty for it. I'm talking about the fallout. What did the student get out of the behavior? This process is sometimes called the ABC data, antecedent behavior consequence. Get it? And it's a great tool for understanding what might be reinforcing the student's behavior. We need to make sure that these observations happen across different settings and different times of the day. And it's not enough to do this once or twice. Chandler and Dahlquist 2015 recommend collecting at least 10 to 15 data points across various settings, with a full week of observation at minimum. I'm going to be honest with you, and I know this is going to frustrate you to hear how many data points need to be involved. It's also going to frustrate some of the folks you work with, because what they often want is to make you aware of the behavior and have you swoop in and fix it. But to create a meaningful plan, we need authentic and consistent data. And that means we've got to get the teachers invested in the collection process. And y'all, if you've worked on a school campus for any amount of time, you know, sometimes that is easier said than done. You may run into resistance. Some teachers may feel like it's not their job, or that data collection should fall on your shoulders. Other people may just say, I don't have the time. And honestly, y'all, they're not wrong. Educators are maxed out, and adding one more thing to their day can feel insurmountable. That's where our solution-focused skills come in. We have to be able to gently shift the narrative from one more thing on your plate to here's a small step that will actually make things easier in the long run. Even getting teachers started with the super simple one-page tracker can help. Let them know it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be a certain piece of paper. Sticky notes, tally marks, check boxes on the margins of a worksheet. It all counts. The goal is progress, and it is not perfection. If we walk up to these folks and expect expert-looking, clean, color-coded graphs, y'all, we are going to lose them before we even get started. Help your staff feel successful from the get-go. Guide them in understanding that their input is vital, no matter how it is presented. So after we've collected that initial observation data, we may be looking at a formal functional behavior assessment. Typically, you're going to see these done by a behavior specialist or a school psychologist. Less often, you can see school counselors do them. It's not ideal, but sometimes that's just the way things have to roll. According to ASCA's ethical standards, our primary role is to support and not replace specialists like behavior analysts or school psychs when it comes to evaluations. But that being said, you know and I know we don't often attain the ideal on our campuses, so we're going to do the best we can. Really, the whole point of the functional behavior assessment is just to determine the function or the purpose of the behavior. So think back to your grad school days. See if you can remember your 4 functions of behavior. I'll give you a minute. Are they coming to you? Okay, here they are. I'll help you out. Escape, attention, tangible items, sensory needs. So escape might look like a student deciding they need to go to the nurse every day when math starts. Attention might be the student that is calling out in class for laughs, or they're looking for a teacher reaction. Tangible could be a tantrum when they're denied access to a preferred object. Sensory might be humming or tapping or rocking as a way to self-soothe. We have to figure out what the purpose of the behavior is that the student is showing us in the classroom. What are they trying to gain from it? And we're going to collect additional data to try to identify the triggers for that, maybe some possible patterns. We're probably going to be talking with teachers and parents, and sometimes even the student, if it's appropriate, just to gather some more information and develop a full picture of what the situation really is. So that's the second step in this process. After we've done our initial observation, then we've tried to determine the function of the behavior. The next thing that we do is set clear goals and objectives. And y'all, this needs to be a team approach. We have to have our teachers on board. If we have behavior specialists, we need to have them on board. Parents need to be involved. And we need to establish goals for one specific component of behavior. You remember your SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So as a group, collectively, we're going to determine what the desired behavior change is. Keep in mind, this is where things fly off the rails so often. We cannot change all the problem behaviors at once. We cannot start with student will not explode in the classroom. That's not going to help. Instead, we've got to really hone in and fine-tune those goals. Student will request a break using a card or gesture in 4 out of 5 opportunities across 2 consecutive days. That's something we can track. We've got to pinpoint and really identify on a super granular level which behavior we want to change first. And then we want to make sure that those goals are something that we can measure so that we can determine if we're making progress or not. I'll be real. I think a lot of people just try to throw any intervention they can think of at the student, wait a couple of days, and then if they don't see the kind of movement they wanted to see, they say, oh, that didn't work, and they go on to the next thing. And they're not really getting a true picture of the intervention or the behavior needs. So be very, very careful about that. Okay, so then after we've set those goals and objectives, then we're going to plan the intervention. We're going to look toward evidence-based interventions, and we're going to tailor those to the student's needs and goals. This is not the time for your teachers pay teachers printables. While those may be quick fixes and you feel they're very convenient, they rarely address the root causes of behavior. Instead, we want to use interventions that are grounded in data and in peer-reviewed studies. You're probably getting tired of hearing that from me, aren't you? But this is not the time for those. We need substantially evidence-based interventions. There are several resources online that you can go to start gathering some of those. One of my favorites is the What Works Clearinghouse. It is not a pretty website, but man, it is effective. And we need to make sure that whatever evidence-based interventions we select match the function of the behavior. If we have someone who is attention-seeking, how can we provide that attention in a better way? How can we provide more consistent, positive reinforcement for that student so that they're not looking for negative attention in another situation? But far and away, again, I'm going to say, the most important part of this is that whatever strategies you select, they need to be supported by research and best practice. So you select those strategies and you create a plan that outlines how those interventions are going to be implemented in different settings. For instance, we've identified these strategies we want to work with regard to this student. In the math classroom, it might look like this. In the English classroom, it looks like this. And in the physical education classroom, it needs to look like this. We can even encourage parents to buy in and try some of these things at home. Highly collaborative, right? Because everywhere the student goes, we want them getting the same consistent message. So again, you see why the school counselor should not be the lone behavior intervention person on campus. It's just not going to work. Then after we've done all of that, we've done our observation and collected our data points, we've made an educated guess about the function or the purpose of the behavior, we've determined exactly what the desired behavior change is, and we've identified evidence-based interventions to get us there, then we're going to implement them. This is going to involve everyone. Teachers, parents, support staff, pretty much anybody on campus that has contact with this student. We're going to put the intervention plan that you all collectively wrote into action. And then we, as the school counselor, can help monitor and encourage so that these interventions are implemented consistently. In my opinion, this is where we most often drop the ball in schools. We really have to make sure that we're being consistent with this and that everyone who's supposed to be providing that intervention is actually doing it. Again, that's often a sticking point. You have one or two people that say, I'm not doing that. That's not my job. If they need that, they should be somewhere else. Have you ever heard anybody say something like that? Yeah, so you're really going to have to work hard to get some of these folks to buy in. You have to paint a picture for them about how their life is going to be easier if they're willing to do these things. You're really going to have to almost campaign to get this thing to move and act like a cheerleader in the background. We can help provide clear instructions to everybody about how to apply these interventions. We can check in to make sure they're not having any questions or concerns through the process. And we can help continuously monitor the student's progress. We can identify changes in behavior, not only positive changes. We may also see some negative changes as well. One negative change you might see is something called an extinction burst. You might have heard that term before, but just in case you haven't, an extinction burst is when a behavior actually gets worse before it gets better. And yes, this is a real thing. This is not a sign that your plan is failing. It's a behavioral indicator. Dr. Tim Shahan has done a lot of work on this, and he explains that when we stop reinforcing a behavior, let's say that when a student throws a fit, we no longer remove them from the classroom, their brain isn't just going to give up right away. It's going to tell them, well, this used to work. Maybe I just need to try harder. And so the behavior is going to ramp up before it dies down. So if you see that kind of extinction burst, it doesn't mean that the interventions you selected aren't working. In fact, a lot of the times, it's a sign that the behavior is losing power and the student is still trying it to see if they can get the same result. So if you see that spike in behavior after a new plan is put in place, hold steady, be consistent. Assure your coworkers the escalation may be part of the process and not a reason to throw the whole thing out. We need to commit to these interventions for at least 4 weeks, which is what the literature recommends. And then as we're implementing these interventions, we're collecting the data. We're progress monitoring. We need to have some sort of a data system so that we can see the changes in the targeted behavior, looking at it regularly, and then adjusting the plan as needed. Again, it does not have to be pretty. It could be tally marks on a sticky note. It really doesn't matter as long as we have a system for aggregating that later and nothing gets lost in the shuffle. And then as we see new needs emerge, if we see needs intensify, whatever happens, we need to be sure that we're not jumping to the next thing too quickly. Then we can review and adjust. We can talk with teachers, our behavior personnel, parents, admin, maybe the student, depending on their age, to assess how effective the plan has been. Do we need to adjust anything? Does anything need to change? Did it work? Did it not work? Do we need more time? And then we need to schedule some regular meetings to continue reviewing the data and discussing the progress. And then if the plan seems to be working well, we're seeing that consistent positive progress we want, then as a committee, not just you on your own, but as a committee, it's time to think about reducing the intensity of the interventions. We can start weaning the student off the supports. This is really important because the goal is not to have these supports in place forever, right? The goal is to help the student build enough skills and independence to not need us as much over time. But weaning supports does not mean pulling the rug out from underneath them all at once. It has to be gradual and strategic. We could start by fading how often the student checks in with an adult, for instance. Maybe they were checking in every class period, then they wean down to once in the morning and once in the afternoon, then to once a day. Or we might reduce how frequently the reinforcement is delivered. We might deliver reinforcement every time we see the desired behavior to start, but then we wean it down to every third or fifth time. This process sometimes is called fading or thinning the intervention. So if you hear some of your folks talking about that, that's what they're talking about. We can also look at increasing the student's ownership. So instead of the teacher saying, "Hey friend, looks like you may need a break," the student begins to develop the ability and capacity to self-monitor and request the break themselves. Now, keep in mind, as we're looking at thinning these interventions, this part of the plan needs just as much monitoring as the original intervention did. We want to make sure that the progress sticks as the supports are being pulled back. And if we start to see signs of regression, we adjust and we ramp things back up where needed, and then we try again. And then just as an aside, I think this goes without saying, but it's worth talking about. We need to be making sure that we're providing ongoing support and communication. I've alluded to this, but this is another place that I think we drop the ball a lot at schools. I don't think it's done intentionally. It just kind of happens because everybody on the school campus is running a million miles an hour. Amen? We all have hundreds of things to do, and not everybody can keep everything at the forefront of their mind all the time. Sometimes certain situations just fall through the cracks. And so we need to make sure that as school counselors and members of this behavior team, that we're maintaining consistent communication with teachers and parents and support staff. We can be the glue that keeps everybody informed about the student's progress, suggesting resources, or identifying ways that teachers can get trained for more support. And sometimes it's just us giving some encouragement, right? And letting the teacher know, "I see you. This is hard and I get it, but I believe in you and this is going to pay off." So I hope that kind of gives you a better idea of what's involved with behavior assessments and drafting behavior plans. It's certainly nothing that we are not qualified to provide in school counseling, but then again, it's really not something that we should be expected to provide, not independently. School counselors can serve as a beautiful addition to the behavior intervention team. We have a lot to contribute. We are great at collaborating and communicating across campus, but we do not want to be the default behavior interventionist if we can help it. But just in case you are called to be one, because sometimes there's just not anyone to do this kind of stuff on our campuses, hopefully this has helped clarify for you what's involved in a behavior assessment and developing a behavior plan. And I will say, if this conversation didn't quite check all the boxes for you, because there is so much involved in this, remember, we always have our School for School Counselors Mastermind open and ready to welcome you. You can find out more about that at schoolforschoolcounselors.com/mastermind, where we meet each and every week for support and consultation, including behavior intervention strategies and building behavior plans. I also want you to know that inside the mastermind, we have our behavior intervention playbook ready to go. It is a checklist style 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of determining next steps for behavior. That's available exclusively to our mastermind members and is such a great help when you're looking to build these plans for giving you a starting point and next steps. All right, I'm going to end this episode here. Thank you for pushing through this froggy, croaky voice that I have this week. I can't wait to get back with you for the next episode where hopefully I'll be a little easier to understand and am going to have some additional insights for you about building behavior plans and what happens next. So keep listening. But in the meantime, I hope you have the best week. Take care.